Alrighty, welcome in everyone. Welcome back to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. Apologies for kind of the radio silence last week. It was a little bit of a tough week, but we are back. We are back in business, and we got a lot to talk about. As you can imagine, we got to start with Sherrone Moore, Michigan, and all of the coaching carousel chaos. We'll talk about Kyle Whittingham a little bit, talk about some of the G5 hires because we haven't had a chance to get to those. But obviously, we will spend a lot of time on Sherrone Moore and Michigan and that saga that is continuing as of right now. Then we'll get into kind of just a little bit of a playoff preview, talk about the bracket just a little bit, break down some of the big time debates and takes, and give my overall takes on those, especially the G5 teams. Do they belong? Should they be there? Is that the best thing for the playoff moving forward? We'll talk about it all in the second segment. And then we'll finish it off with a little bit of just a headline bowl season wrap up. We'll talk about Fernando Mendoza winning the Heisman. We'll talk about Army Navy. We'll get into a lot of different things, including a transfer portal that is starting to go a little bit wild, and we'll talk about that at length at the very end of the show. But let's go ahead and jump into this chaos that is going on in the coaching carousel, and you got to start up there in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Sherrone Moore has been fired, and it's been reported at this point why he has been fired. It was an improper relationship with a subordinate, with what seems like an assistant on the football team. Everything that has happened since then is incredibly scary, incredibly tragic, incredibly upsetting. It's a man that was very likely, or was losing his job, was teetering with his personal life and his family life, and now he's likely losing his freedom. Just incredibly poor decisions from Sherrone Moore from start to finish. How long this was going on, how long Michigan knew about it before they acted, all of that stuff is entirely up in the air. I don't feel it's my place to say one way or another what happened. Did they wait until after signing day? Did they wait until certain things to happen to pull this trigger? I don't know. I think we'll learn more about that. It sounds like Michigan is doing a full kind of investigation into this and how kind of unfolded. Sounds like they had investigated it 2 or 3 times prior to this and hadn't found anything substantial. Obviously, they found something substantial at this point, and that happened, and then everything that has happened since then has happened. And I really won't comment too much on that part of it, frankly, because I'm not super qualified to talk about a lot of that stuff. I don't know what is going on with that. I do know what the charges are. He was charged with breaking and entering, with stalking, with a number of different things that, again, go way beyond the football field and way beyond what a lot of us are qualified to be talking about at a moment like this. That being said, incredibly poor decisions from a man that was given an incredible opportunity to lead an incredible program and do some really remarkable things, and he made a number of really, really terrible decisions to put him in the position that he is right now. So that's probably all I'll say on that. We obviously will update as this thing kind of unfolds. It sounds like there is a court date at the very least for January 22nd. We'll see if that actually starts the trial or they push it back, and a lot of stuff will happen around Sherrone Moore over the next little bit. For now, let's focus on what's going to happen with Michigan, because that's a little bit easier to wrap our heads around, and I think is a little bit easier to just get a grip on. But for this specific job, it's an incredible one. It just plain and simple is. There's no doubt about that. Now, before I get into the specific people to watch and all of that good stuff, I think you'd really do have to look at doing an entire overhaul of this Michigan athletic department. It's not to say that every coach or every administrator or anything should be fired. I can't believe they haven't gotten rid of Ward Manuel. It's not to say he's done an outright terrible job there, but there is something with that program right now that is just a little bit tainted. And whether people like this or not, a lot of this is a PR fight. A lot of this is how do you look to other people, to prospective hires, to other people that want to invest in college football. We'll talk about that later on in private equity and everything. You're in a position where you have to be able to start building this thing back up. I don't think you can do it with certain faces still being out front of your program. We'll see what that looks like. I think it's a little bit easier once that hire is made to clear house within that football program. In terms of the athletic department, they're going to have to look themselves in the mirror and figure out, is Ward Manuel the best person to lead us forward, or has more damage been done to his image and the image of Michigan than needs to be done going forward? Obviously, that will be debated. That will be something that we will absolutely talk about if action is made or when it is made, all of that good stuff. But they're going to have to look into that, and they're going to have to figure out where they want to be, how they want to be looked at, because I have a certain idea of what Michigan athletics and what Michigan football is right now, and I can't imagine it's the one they want to have. So that's something that we'll talk about in more time. But for the football part of this, it really feels like, as upsetting and not the circumstances you want it to happen under, I think they're going to come out of this with a better football coach than Sherrone Moore. I think Sherrone Moore did some great things at Michigan. I think he is a fine coach. I think he did some great things as their offensive coordinator prior to that. I don't think he was getting them to the mountaintop. And I really don't think he was getting them much further than he got them this year, if I'm being totally honest. Now, I could be wrong about that. I don't think we'll have a chance to figure out for obvious reasons. But at the end of the day, I think they're going to find their way into a better coach. I think there are a number of options. All the candidates that I've seen, I would lean over Sherrone Moore. That doesn't mean you're not going to lose a lot of kids. That doesn't mean you're not going to have to rebuild this thing a little bit. That doesn't mean you don't have a tough 2026 coming up. I just tend to believe from a coaching perspective, you are likely to get better in this process. Who's that going to be is the big time question, and the candidates are all over the place. This is something that we will talk about much, much more as it unfolds, but obviously, the name that everyone brought up initially was Kalen DeBoer. Everyone thought, he's unhappy down there in Tuscaloosa, and he's definitely going to want to get back into the Big Ten, back into a comfortable environment for him. He's staying. He released a statement this weekend. They came out, and it sounds like they're working on contract negotiations right now for him. I think the thing about Kalen DeBoer is maybe he doesn't fit perfectly with Alabama. Maybe he isn't quite as happy or quite as comfortable as he was up there in Washington. He's also a competitor, and he also understands that if he's the guy that can keep this train rolling after Nick Saban moves on, he's looked at differently for the rest of his life. And I think he understands that, and he's not nearly at the point where he's ready to hang it up. He is going to the playoff in a couple of weeks or next weekend. He will be playing a playoff game on Friday. He's got no reason to go anywhere. I don't think he will go anywhere. Kenny Dillingham was a name that was brought up. He'd be my number one choice, and I think he is. For a lot of Wolverines fans out there, it seems, as of right now, that he is staying in Tempe. So I would bet that does not end up being the hire. If they find a way to get that one done, you nailed it. I really think he can do remarkable things. You put an entire machine behind him like Michigan has, he can win multiple national titles. That's how highly I think of Kenny Dillingham. Again, I think he's going to stick in Tempe, and can't fault a man for being loyal to the soil there. But then we bring to the guy right here, Jedd Fisch. That would be my bet. If I was to bet right this second who will be the next coach of Michigan, I'd probably lean towards Jedd Fisch. I think he's kind of the situation that a lot of people think Kalen DeBoer is. I don't think he's all that happy over there at Washington. I don't think that's a place that he wanted to set up shop for long term, and I think he wanted that Florida job very badly, didn't end up getting it. I think he's going to want this one very badly, and I think he could have a chance to keep Bryce Underwood around, or at the worst, bring over Damon Williams, which your worst being a top 15 or top 20 quarterback in the country is not a bad thing by any means. So we'll see how that plays out. I would put Jedd Fisch as my favorite as of this very second. There's a couple other options here. Eli Drinkwitz is someone to watch. He did sign an extension, but again, extensions don't really mean anything if you're dealing with a program like Michigan. Jeff Brom, another one to watch. Jesse Minter, an interesting one. Does have a show cause, but there was a court case earlier today that kind of put show causes in an interesting position, and we can talk about that more later on, but might not be as big of an issue as some people might think it is, in my own personal opinion. Now, if you can get Eli Drinkwitz, this does change the conversation just a little bit, but if you get beyond Jedd Fisch, if you don't get Kalen DeBoer, which it doesn't seem like you're going to, you don't get Kenny Dillingham, and you don't get Jedd Fisch, I'd probably write out 2026 with Biff Poggi. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, and you don't want to throw in the towel on a coaching search, but you're getting into this thing late. It's a very messy scene over there right now. It might not be the worst thing in the world to have a couple of months to get your ducks in a row. You might not be a great team in 2026, but you're the first at the table instead of being the very last one when there's not that much food on it. So I think they'll make a hire. I tend to believe it'll be Jedd Fisch at this very moment. If it's not, then I think it's going to get really interesting. Could be Eli Drinkwitz, could be Jeff Brom would be an interesting choice. I still think would be an upgrade over Sherrone Moore, and we can talk about that more if that does happen. But at the end of the day, a really tragic situation in a terrible position for Michigan to be in moving forward. There's no doubt about that. I think you're in a position now where first of all, really hope everything works out for mainly Sherrone Moore's wife and his kids. I hope Sherrone Moore is able to start piecing his life back together after this. Doesn't seem like it's going to be remotely near college football, probably for good reason, but at the end of the day, you hope everyone comes out of this okay. You hope Michigan is able to kind of build this thing back in sort of clean house in some respects and become a respectable football program again, because from where I'm sitting, they're not right now. I hope this all works out for everyone involved. I hope that there's not massive implications on this for the future of Michigan football or any of that. The reality is, we're going to focus on the football. I would bet on Jed Fish, but still a lot of work to be done here. It sounds like Michigan still has a little bit of their ducks to get in a row in this one, but it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. We will obviously update when they do have a hire, and we'll see who that ends up being. We'll see if they do make a hire or just move into next season with an interim. Everything is on the table as far as I'm concerned, especially with how all this went down. Kyle Whittingham seems to be hanging him up. This has been pushed back on a little bit that he might be looking for other coaching opportunities, so we'll kind of put a pin in that, in the retiring question mark kind of energy there. But he is leaving Utah. He will no longer be the head coach, and Morgan Scalley will take over the defensive coordinator that was named the head coach in waiting. I believe last summer, if I'm not mistaken. He was named that position, and they have held firm there. We'll talk about their private equity partnership, I suppose, a little bit later in the show, but at the very least, they did not get involved in this coaching search. So Morgan Scalley will be the new guy over there, has done an incredible job with that defense, and is very much like Kyle Whittingham in his approach and his demeanor. I tend to believe Utah is going to be more than fine. Obviously, losing a guy like Kyle Whittingham is devastating, a special head coach and one of the very, very few of kind of a dying breed in the world of college football. But at the end of the day, wherever he ends up, whether it's at Utah, whether it's at another program being a defensive coordinator or an analyst, or if it's just hanging out with his family and kids, at the end of the day, he is a very, very special guy and one of those guys that, for me, will go down as one of the very best coaches that has graced college football. And then we got some under-the-radar hires, mainly G5 hires here that we got to talk about because a lot has happened since the last time we talked, and also a lot happened in the middle where we just weren't able to get to all of these. But Colorado State has hired Jim Mora from UConn. Great hire. Absolutely nailed it, especially going into a bigger conference. This guy can handle that. There's no doubt about that. Has matched up with some big-time programs in the past and has handled himself very nicely, especially this year against a team like Duke that won the ACC, was able to knock them off late in the season. Oregon State hires Jamarcus Shepard, the wide receiver coach for Alabama. Really, really like this energy. I think this guy can totally make this a very, very interesting place to kind of set up shop, I think the energy will kind of be the same as like a Syracuse, where you bring in a couple of transfer portal guys, you have a really hard-nosed culture, might be a little bit up and down at times, but you can hit the jackpot with the right quarterback because that's an offense and that's a guy that I'd very badly want to play for. We'll see how he fills out his staff, obviously, but at face value, really like that hire. Washington State hired Kirby Moore, the offensive coordinator for Missouri. This one I'm a little bit iffy about. I like the hire fine. I think Kirby Moore is a good play caller, a good coach. I question how long-term that's going to be, whether that's him getting hired away or that's him just not fully working there. I question what that looks like without the elite SEC talent that he has had in the past at Missouri. Stanford, Tavita Pritchard, if that's a name that sounds pretty familiar, he was the quarterback when they knocked off USC as 41-point dogs, if I'm not mistaken. He was a backup and a teammate of Andrew Luck, so makes sense that this happened. He was the quarterback coach over in the Washington Commanders for the last couple of years. Very talented guy, young and upcoming guy, will be really interesting to watch. There's no doubt about that. Stanford is leaning into people that understand Stanford, and I think that's what you kind of have to do. If you're in their position, this one will be awesome to watch unfold, and I've kind of high hopes for this one. I have questions about what you can do overall at Stanford, but really like this fit, and I think they could do some really interesting things. North Texas hires Neil Brown, a name that a lot of people had forgotten about just a little bit, but West Virginia's old head coach was at Troy, had some great success there, including a massive win over LSU back in the day. This is a great hire. It's definitely a very stabilizing hire in a time when they were going to lose a whole lot of guys, and they have lost a whole lot of coaches throughout this process. Neil Brown is a great kind of reset, and I think he could do some great things there. Obviously, very comfortable at the G5 level and very motivated after a year that did not go his way. I believe he was an analyst for Texas this year, so he wants to be back in charge of a program. Now he gets that shot. Tulane hires their offensive coordinator, Will Hall, to be the new head coach. I think they nailed it. I think there were a couple different options. Once Blake Baker kind of turned down that job and decided to return to LSU as the defensive coordinator, this felt like the ultimate move. I think they nailed it. I think it's a guy that fully understands what that program's about. He has a great relationship with John Summerall, and John Summerall's already made a donation to Tulane as he's walking out the door. It's been a very, very kind of example for what a coaching carousel should look like, what a coach leaving a program should look like, what John Summerall has done over there, and I think he's setting Will Hall up for a ton of success very early on, as Tulane has pretty much always had. Charles Huff, hired over there at Memphis, great hire. This guy has done incredible things at every single place he was at, and he deserves that big-time moment. With that money behind him, he can do special things. I talked about Brian Hartline to USF. I think this guy's a difference maker. I think he could have been hired for Penn State, and I would have said this is a great hire. I think he's going to do incredible things there and pretty quickly be off to another Power 4 job. JMU, they're going to get Billy Napier. I don't know why it says Billy Napier. A little bit juice there, but he returns to the Sun Belt. I think they nailed it. Again, with a coaching staff that's going to have so many people walk out the door, getting a guy that knows exactly how he wants to run his program. Now, he won't call plays, which is a little bit of a slap in the face to Florida people down there, but at the end of the day, he will not call offensive plays. I think it's a great fit, and I think it's a program that kind of needs that experience, needs that kind of like what Neil Brown is bringing to North Texas. I think Billy Napier brings the exact same thing to JMU, and I think they'll both be better for it. And then Coastal Carolina hires Ryan Beard, one of my favorite coaches upcoming in the world. Missouri State did an incredible job in their first year in the Conference USA. He did an incredible job for that football team, and now he gets Coastal Carolina, a very interesting program that is slated to do very interesting things. If they can recruit that area the right way, if they can hit the portal the right way, that's a wide open conference where they compete with JMU for maybe a playoff spot. We'll have to see. But at the end of the day, a lot going on in the coaching carousel world. Obviously, it all centers around Ann Arbor, Michigan. We'll see what happens with that football program is what we'll be focused on a little bit more aggressively, but we obviously will update you on what happens with Sherrone Moore, what his future looks like. I don't think it's going to be in college football. I'll leave that there. Hopefully, he's able to piece back together parts of his life. But at the end of the day, we will see how all that unfolds. We'll stick to the football. As of right now, we will stick to who they're going to end up hiring. Have to imagine it happens here pretty soon, and hopefully we can talk about it here pretty soon. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, let's just get into the playoff takes. Let's look at the bracket. Let's get into all of the matchups that we're going to see this upcoming weekend and maybe going forward. We'll talk about Notre Dame, Miami. We'll talk about Notre Dame's bowl game opt-out. We'll talk about our Alabama and BYU situation, the Group of 5 take, and my overall take in this mess of a playoff situation. We'll talk about it all right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the coaching carousel updates. Obviously, a lot of it about Sherrone Moore in Michigan. This is something that we'll continue to talk about. We'll talk about what's going on with Sherrone Moore. More specifically, will talk about what's going on with Michigan. Not more important by any means, but something that I can wrap my head around a little bit better in and not over my head about. But at the end of the day, let's get into some playoff preview / takes. We'll just talk about these games really quickly, and then we got to talk about some of the things that made people pretty angry on Selection Sunday. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll start with just the bracket overall. Indiana jumps into that number 1 seed after a very good win over Ohio State, 13-10 over there in Indianapolis. Ohio State just slides down to the 2. I tend to believe Georgia should have jumped up to the 2 seed, Ohio State down to the 3, but splitting hairs at the end of the day doesn't make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. But that's one small difference that I would have made. Texas Tech rounds out the at-large bids. Wasn't much of a question there. Really was just a question of, does Georgia lose and allow them to slide up even further? Very, very good win over BYU, and obviously kept BYU from jumping into this playoff. But the 5 seed, Oregon, will take on JMU, one of 2 group of 5 teams, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Up there in Eugene, it'll be an interesting thing to watch. There's no doubt about that. I don't think it'll be all that pretty for JMU, but again, we'll break those games down tomorrow. We'll give full picks and everything, but yeah, I am going to have roughly the same take that just about everyone is going to have on those 2 games. Ole Miss gets Tulane in the other group of 5 game, a rematch from earlier this year where Ole Miss won 45-10. We will see what that looks like when that game does come around. I think Tulane has gotten a lot better. Tend to believe Ole Miss has as well, but at the end of the day, we'll talk about that game in more depth tomorrow. The one on Friday night, we got Oklahoma taking on Alabama in another rematch over there in Norman. This time they get a little home and home in the same season. It'll be an interesting one. 2 teams that are kind of just searching for offense and playing elite defense. Could be a 10-3 type game over there in Norman. And then A&M Miami, what I consider to be the best game of the weekend, the most intriguing game for a million different reasons, mainly that these 2 are the reason we don't have Notre Dame in this thing and they get to face off in week 1. But a couple little issues with, I don't want to say minor issues with the seeding. I would have Georgia in the 2 seed, as I said earlier. I'd probably have Miami as the 9 seed over Alabama. Would have dropped them 1 spot, but again, that would have created a whole other debate when we're talking about the Miami-Notre Dame thing that we will get into here in a second. Like a lot of people, I tend to believe Oregon and Ole Miss are going to roll on to the second round. They were really fascinating to me. How they handle these first-round games is really interesting. Do they go all out in the first quarter or first half to make sure they're up by 30 or whatever it is at halftime and can kind of play it a little bit easier in the second half to give their guys some rest? Do they play it as a normal game without any question? They don't take any guys out. They don't even think about, the physical advantages that they will have on Saturday. We'll see. I think they're really, really fascinating teams that have a chance to not only kind of work on things, tweak a couple of things, but get a little bit healthier as they get close to a matchup with Texas Tech if you're Oregon, a matchup with Georgia if you're Ole Miss, which would be another rematch in this whole process. But at the end of the day, that'll be a fascinating thing to watch. Those 5 and 6 seeds, especially this year with those 2 group of 5 teams, are a little bit more open-ended and a little bit more open to doing some pretty darn special things during this time of year. As for all the debates going on in this playoff craziness, as I call it, we have Selection Sunday, and everyone loses their mind about Notre Dame Miami. I think the right team got in. I'll say that to start off. I think Miami deserved to be in the playoff over Notre Dame. I didn't think there was much of a debate about that. The problem is the committee handled this so uniquely terribly, and I wish it was a new thing, but it's not by any means. For weeks, I sat here and I said Miami should be over Notre Dame because, yes, they had the 2 losses in the middle of the season, and I, frankly, was kind of writing them off a little bit. And then they just kept rattling off wins. They kept getting the message that if they did not win out and do it convincingly, they were not going to be able to be in the playoff. At a certain point, probably around week 10 or week 9, maybe even week 11, they had the chance to move Miami over Notre Dame to say, we feel like they've made up enough ground after those 2 losses in the middle of the season to say that head-to-head should matter again. They never did it. And the only reason they did it, seemingly, the only reason they did it, according to Hunter Yurachek, is they were right next to each other in the rankings. That should not be the only time you look at head-to-head. It is absolutely crazy that that's the way we think about this, and it's just an insane way to go about your business. And it's why Notre Dame's really, really mad. And it's why I can't really be too mad at them for being mad, because you're putting them in a position where every single week they're saying, okay, I guess the head-to-head doesn't have that big of a deal. I guess we've done enough to make that not as big of a deal as it would be in some other circumstances. And then it was the most important thing in the world overnight. I think the right team got in. I think Miami deserved to be in. I don't think there was much of a question about that from my point of view. I think Miami deserved to be in over Notre Dame. I'll talk about Alabama in a second. I think they deserve to be in plenty as well. But the way this was handled from that committee and the way this was messaged mainly from that committee was just pitiful from start to finish. And even Alabama jumping over Notre Dame was a terrible explanation. You could have done it, and I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought Alabama deserved to be over Notre Dame when they were ranked over them. But then he came out and said they were up 17-0 on Auburn, even though they gave up the 17-point lead. He said they had a really cool call on 4th and 2. It's just a terrible way for us to disseminate information and for us to justify who gets into the playoff. All you have to say is we believe their resume is better. For Alabama, Notre Dame, you could have just said Alabama's strength of schedule is better. They have the same record. That's that. And call it a day there. For Miami, Notre Dame, you could have said we saw it on the football field and we don't have any ability to go over that. And you could have done it in week 10. You decided to wait till the end, and now you've made Notre Dame very angry, and it's created a couple more problems. And we'll talk about that here in a second. So I don't have an issue with the decision. I think Miami deserved to be in. I think they got the right 12, as all things considered under the rules that we have right now. I think they got the right 12 teams. The problem is you left a team out and you put in a number of teams that I would say are almost definitely not as good as Notre Dame is. But at the end of the day, the results on the field have to matter. That being said, that's not where the Notre Dame saga ended by any means. Notre Dame has opted out of their bowl game against BYU. They would have played in the Pop-Tart Bowl. That has been taken over by Georgia Tech, so will be a fun matchup nonetheless down there in Orlando. But I hate this. I hate the decision, and because I don't think the right people made this decision. It's been going around the last couple of days that it was just the AD and the administration that went about making the decision and kind of just told the football team what they were going to do. I don't know that's what happened. We will obviously see as this kind of unfolds if there's more information that comes out about who ended up voting, if the players really voted. But I'm sorry, you're going to be hard-pressed to convince me that Marcus Freeman, Leonard Moore, C.J. Carr, Jordan Faison, Drake Bowen, and many others sat in a football room and said, I'm good. I don't want to compete. I don't really care about playing a football game. I just don't think that's in their DNA. I don't. And I tend to believe that's why you're seeing the AD out there doing all the press and not Marcus Freeman. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong on this. And if there's a Notre Dame fan that has genuine intimate knowledge, please let me know, one way or the other. I don't think Marcus Freeman and this football team made this decision. That's just my gut feeling. I don't think those guys have a non-competitive bone in their body. Maybe I'm wrong. Regardless, I really hate the decision. I do. It's absolutely terrible. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And now you have a memorandum of understanding going into next year that if you're in the top 12, you're good anyway. You would have been in over Miami this year, even if they were ranked above you. That's asinine. It's absolutely insane. It's crazy that Notre Dame gets to sit in the same room that Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey do, but Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey have to argue for 18 and 16 teams. Pete Bavacqua gets to sit in there and argue for one. It's crazy. It's not the way that this is supposed to work. I don't really care if Notre Dame joins a conference, really. I think they should, but one way or another, I really don't care. Teams not scheduling them, I'll be totally honest, kind of makes me happy. If I'm not going to have a team that really wants to push college football forward the correct way, which I think is opting into these bowl games and saying that they matter and pushing all your energy into it and pushing your chips to the center of the table and proving a point on the football field. I don't want that team making massive decisions in the sport. Now, here's the reality. Doesn't matter what I want. Notre Dame is going to make massive decisions in the sport because they're Notre Dame, and I fully understand that. That is not lost on me. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's a ridiculous decision. I don't think it was made by the right people, and I think if the right people were making the decision, this wouldn't be the one. But we'll see. We'll talk more about bowl season and the issues with bowl season right now and why it makes me uniquely angry. But for time being, just hate this decision from Notre Dame. Hate the placement or the power that Notre Dame holds in the CFP conversation as we're talking about expansion. The fact that they have the equal seat at the table that the SEC and the Big Ten do is a little bit ridiculous to me. And people will say they got boxed out for those teams. I get that. I'm not saying that they have the same amount of power when it comes to Selection Sunday. But Pete Bavacqua was sitting in that room the same way Greg Sankey is. They're just not arguing for one team the way Pete Bavacqua is. Plain and simple. So I don't love that Notre Dame made this decision. I don't love a lot of things going on with Notre Dame right this second, but we'll see how this unfolds. We'll see what next year holds in. We'll see how many teams are scheduling the Fighting Irish going forward. Alabama. That's the big-time question that everyone feels like. It feels like a lot of people are screaming it and not getting acknowledged the way that they would love to be getting acknowledged. BYU fell during their this past weekend after they lost to Texas Tech and got rolled by Texas Tech. Alabama loses by 21 to Georgia, and they don't move an inch. They stay at 9. Nothing changes. Everything changes behind them. Nothing changes in front of them or them. When we're talking about Bama, the last month of the season has been ugly. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they've been playing great football down the stretch of the season. Didn't play great against Oklahoma, was -3 in turnovers. Lost this game to Georgia in pretty dominating fashion. Didn't play great football against South Carolina. Didn't play great football against LSU at times during that game. We have to remember what happened in the middle of that season. They went to UGA and got a win in a massive, massive moment. They went to Tennessee and got a massive win. They played Missouri on the road before they had a ton of injuries, before they lost their quarterback, and got a massive win. They had Vanderbilt to their place, won by 16 points. It's not to say that we're going to get that October Bama in the playoff, and it's not to say it's a little bit frustrating that, yeah, we're likely going to get a hampered Bama, a team that is a little bit injured, a team that leans on Ty Simpson probably more than they should, and a team that's just not as good as they were earlier in the season. That's frustrating. I'm not here to argue it's not. But they deserve to be in, because the entire 12 weeks has to matter. And I get the Florida State loss is terrible. I thought they did more than enough in the middle of that football season. I thought they were the best team in the country, really, for about 5 weeks stretch. They were incredible. They were nearly unstoppable offensively. The defense was finding their groove and playing really high-level football. I get the frustration of a team like Alabama, a team that has looked like Alabama has looked over the last month to get in there. But you go back another month, and they were one of the best teams in the country. So I really don't have an issue with it. I get the whole, I probably would have dropped them one spot just to give them a little bit of a punishment for losing that game. But at the end of the day, I think they more than deserve to be in, and I think they're in a very good position as they head into this one, as long as they can get some guys healthy. We'll talk about that game tomorrow because it's going to be a really, really interesting one over there in Norman. My Group of 5 take. This is the one that everyone is talking about. People are very mad that the G5 has 2 seats at the table this year. I'll put this very, very plainly. I think the G5 should have a playoff. I really do. I think it'd be a great thing. I would really, really enjoy watching it. I would appreciate the G5 champion, maybe not to the same level that I would appreciate the overall champion, but that's kind of the world that we live in. I think a G5 playoff would be great. The G5 doesn't want it. Plain and simple. Every G5 fan that I've seen, a lot of the G5 coaches or G5 ADs do not seem interested in the slightest. I don't have a problem with the G5 having a spot in the playoff, and I really don't have a problem with the G5 getting 2 spots in this one. I'm mad at the ACC, I'll tell you that much. I'm frustrated with the ACC that they allowed a 7-5 team to represent them in their championship game. I'm frustrated that 7-5 team was close enough to the 10-2 team in that conference to beat them. It's frustrating. It's a little bit ridiculous, and the tiebreakers in the ACC are absolutely ridiculous. But the reality is, Tulane and JMU just played the games in front of them, and they played good football, and they won those games. Yes, they are not playing the same sport. I totally agree with that sentiment, and that's why I think a G5 playoff would be better for everyone involved. But at the end of the day, if the G5 doesn't want it, I'm not pushing that on them. So I think Tulane and JMU earn the right to be here. I think there's no doubt about that. We can argue about how it should be moving forward. Should there be a minimum ranking requirement? They have to be top 15 to get in. They have to be top 20. I don't know. Once you add that, I tend to believe you're just going to try to box them out by not giving the respect to wins that are good wins at the G5 level. It's a battle back and forth. I understand there's not a great answer here. In my absolutely ideal world, it would be the best 12 teams in the country. The committee that we have right now, I have no trust in to decide who the 12 best teams in the country are, so I'm kind of good with us having tie-ins and us having auto bids. Frankly, if we're moving forward with this group of people as the committee, I'd want as few at-large bids as possible. If we can move and change the committee, then I'd be more than fine with it being the best 12 or best 16 teams, because let's be totally honest, that's where we're heading, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But overall, everyone's getting mad at Tulane. Everyone's getting mad at JMU for finding their way into the playoff. either get mad at the people that didn't write the rules the correct way and allowed it to be just the top 5 conference champions and not including the Power 4, although I don't want to see Duke play in this game, in this playoff either. They earn the right to be here. If you're going to be mad at anyone, be mad at the ACC, and then just see what happens in Eugene and Oxford. I don't think it's going to be pretty. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I think it's going to be pretty, but at the end of the day, the idea that we are demeaning two teams that didn't do anything wrong other than win football games and benefit from the structure of a playoff is ridiculous to me. I don't think they're going to compete. I don't think they would compete in 99% of the realities, but at the end of the day, I don't have much of a problem with JMU and Tulane being in this thing, mainly because plenty of other teams had their chance to take those spots and they left it on the table. And my overall take, as we head into these playoffs, it's going to be really fun. We're going to really enjoy these games coming up this weekend. We have 2 incredible ones and 2 that could be all-timers for all we know by the end of it. It's going to be really fun. We're going to have great quarterfinals. We're going to have great semifinals. We're going to have a great final game. This thing is a mess. The process of this thing is an absolute disaster. The fact that we have weekly rankings is really ridiculous to me in a number of different ways. I'll have more complete thoughts as we move forward. This thing is going to get expanded. I don't think I have to break that to anyone. It's going to at least 16. I hope it doesn't go beyond that. But let's be totally honest. 16 is just one step closer to 24, which is one step closer to 32. This is why I hated expansion. I thought 4 teams was okay. I thought it was fine. I thought 8 teams was probably the furthest I was willing to go. We're at 12 now, and we're rolling down a hill, and I think just now people are starting to realize that this is the way it was always going to go down. There was no other reality where we were going to get out of this thing with only 12 teams or only 16 teams. That's why I'm frustrated with this. And if the process doesn't change, if the size and structure doesn't change, although it's going to change and probably in the direction I don't want it to, but at the end of the day, a lot of things have to be fixed about this playoff. The size of it is really not one of them, as far as I'm concerned, at least not at this very moment. The fact that Notre Dame and Texas and Vanderbilt are upset, I don't really care. It means this playoff is a size that means it means something, and that's important to me. I think once you expand past 16, you lose some of that meaning, and then you're arguing over 8 and 4 and 7 and 5 teams of whether they should get into the playoff. We'll see what happens with this. I'll have more comprehensive thoughts and more well-thought-out thoughts here a little bit later. I'll give my full thought on what I think the playoff should be, how I think it should work. I'll probably make my own committee out of some of the incredible college football personalities we do have in the world, but I don't love this. I don't love the way that it works. I don't love the way that we're heading. And we'll get into more of that in the next segment because we'll talk about that Utah private equity investment. But at the end of the day, let's take our break here, and then we'll get into a little bit of a just overall catch-up. We got to talk about Army-Navy. We got to talk about the 2 bowl games that happened this weekend. We got to talk about Fernando Mendoza winning the Heisman and a number of other things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the things going on with the playoff. We talked about the Miami-Notre Dame debate, the Alabama debate, should they be in? I tend to believe they should be pretty firmly in, but at the end of the day, we talked about all of that. Now it's time to get into just a little bit of a catch-up with all the things that happened this past weekend and a little bit into last week. Again, apologies for a little bit of radio silence there, but let's go ahead and jump into this and let's talk about Army-Navy to start things off. Navy escapes this one 17-16. This game's always incredible. It is one of the best things that we have in the sport, in the world of sports, plain and simple. But it is one of the most incredible things that we get to see. It perfectly represents why this sport is so special, because it's chaotic. It's chaotic as can be in between those white lines, but it is a beautiful, beautiful representation of what these kids are and what they represent. And Navy got to sing second. That's the ultimate honor in this game, and Navy was able to lock it up for a second year, lock up the Commander-in-Chief's trophy for the second year. But This game was insane. It was absolutely ridiculous. There was an INT from both quarterbacks. Blake Horvath felt like he just didn't have hands at certain parts of this game, but only lost one fumble. He fumbled 3 times. Kate Helms fumbled as well, but didn't lose the ball. It was ridiculous. It was all over the place, from the what looked like a floater from Donald Trump on the coin toss to a truly ridiculous game from start to finish. But from the moment Blake Horvath threw that INT, he pretty much took over this game. Navy scores the final 10 points of this game, is able to win it. A huge amount of respect to Army for keeping this one close. It's just one of those games that, for whatever reason, will always find a way to deliver, will always find a way to come down to the wire. Even in a year where Navy was outpacing Army pretty good, Army was able to really fight and make this one a very, very fun one over there in Baltimore. We had a 4-overtime classic to start off with Bowl Week. The Celebration Bowl happened this weekend in Atlanta. South Carolina State wins 40-38 over Prairie View A&M. Incredible. Just a great, great way to kick off bowl season. South Carolina State was down 21-0 heading into halftime. 10 minutes into the second half, they had come back to tie it, and then it was just a duel to the finish line. Cameron Peters was incredible for Prairie View A&M. Ryan Stubblefield was awesome for South Carolina State, and they were able to squeak this one out in a very, very weird overtime with a missed field goal, with multiple missed two-point conversions, but they find one at the very end and are able to get it done. We'll get more into this FCS playoffs tomorrow when we talk about all of the games. We break down all the games for the playoff this weekend. We'll also break down the games that already happened for the FCS and the ones that are coming up, because some great semifinals and some big-time upsets thus far. North Dakota State no longer in the FCS playoffs after going in minus money to win that thing. The LA Bowl, Boise State gets absolutely rolled by Washington 38-10. This one was ugly, and it was really ugly. When you think about it, if JMU were to lose to Troy, it might have been Boise State in the playoff at the end of this thing. Now, I tend to believe they might have leaned Duke, but I don't know. That would have been a relative toss-up, and that one would have gotten ugly very, very quickly. But at the end of the day, Damon Williams was nearly perfect here. Jonah Coleman did just about whatever he wanted. Denzel Boston was a total mismatch, and 5 INTs from this Washington defense. Maddox Madsen had to hit the bench at a certain point. It was tough. It was tough for Boise State in this football game. A really interesting squad heading into the Pac-12. Obviously going to be a very interesting year for a lot of those teams. They're still in a very good spot, but was not their day on Saturday night. Fernando Mendoza has won the Heisman Trophy. Fernando Mendoza takes home the Heisman, and just an incredible speech. A really, really beautiful thing to hear. The relationship between him and his mother is special. If you have not read her article in Players Tribune, please do. Grab some tissues first, but do that. It is incredible to see that relationship that they do have. And I thought this race should have been closer. I'll put it plain and simple. I thought him and Pavia should have been as neck and neck as just about anyone over the last 10 years has been for the Heisman. But Mendoza kind of won in a landslide. Not a landslide, but pretty comfortably at the very end of this thing. I lean towards Mendoza. If I had a vote in this, it would have been Mendoza 1, Pavia 2, probably Jacob Rodriguez 3. But that's a conversation for another day. At the end of the day, for me, it's Mendoza stepped up. There were 3 massive moments in the Indiana season where things could have gone very wrong, and they didn't. And it was obviously when he threw a pick against Oregon and had to lead them back down the field, did it perfectly, scored a touchdown, took back over that football game. Penn State, you go down late in that football game, you have to drive down the field, make a couple of big-time throws to Charlie Becker and then Omar Cooper with an incredible catch on an incredible throw at the end of the game. And then the Big Ten Championship. Ohio State is leaning on you. They're a very aggressive team. They're a very intense team. And he makes a massive throw on third down, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, down the field to kind of ice that game away. That's the difference to me. Diego Pavia went on the road to Alabama, had a couple of turnovers, didn't play all that well, went to Texas, took him 3 quarters to start playing very well in that football game. And also, when everyone throws the stats back in my face, I think they might want to look at how many quarters Fernando Mendoza played in certain games this season. You'll see 3 in a lot of those. So overall, I don't think it should be a stat award, just plain and simple a stat award. I tend to believe Fernando Mendoza deserved to win it. I would have picked Fernando Mendoza had I had a vote. More than happy to have a vote. If anyone over there at the Heisman Trophy is listening, but don't love the way Diego Pavia handled it. I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel with this take. I wouldn't love it if I was an NFL GM, so I can't imagine they did. But at the end of the day, we'll see what happens with Diego Pavia moving forward. Just can't imagine the last last 48 hours for him have made him more desirable on that than he already was. But we'll see what happens there. Obviously, Fernando Mendoza very deserving. Julian Say and Jeremiah Love deserving to be in New York. A weird year for the Heisman, but to me, not an uninspiring Heisman, not an upsetting Heisman. Definitely not a guy I'm worried about in an NFL locker room. For some reason, that was a take. The idea that he would not be accepted by teammates because he fights and cares about his teammates, that's ridiculous in my opinion. But again, we'll see how all this unfolds. We'll see what Fernando Mendoza does. Tend to believe his name's getting called pretty early on or very early on in that NFL draft in April. Utah gets a private equity deal with Otro Capital. They are going to be very interesting to watch. It's over $500 million is what the investment is, and it will essentially kind of create a different entity for Utah Athletics that is a for-profit entity. Not necessarily different from the way that they act right now, but will not be directly under the umbrella. Will be a different entity that will have a different board to it. I guess is probably the best way to put this. This is a dangerous proposition. It's also relatively unavoidable in the way that we're going in college sports, especially college football. They've mismanaged money in this sport for a very, very long time, and now a lot of people are asking them to spend a lot of money. Some teams don't have it, including Utah, and frankly, when they're looking down there in Lubbock and they're thinking that's what we have to compete with, I don't think this is a crazy decision. Now, in practice, what it seems like this is going to look like, and obviously we will get more details, and frankly, we'll get as many details in the actions that are taken by Utah over the next couple of years as anything else, but it seems that Capital is going to have two of 9 members on the Utah Athletic Board. They will not be in charge of hirings and firings. They will not be in charge of which players or which teams get the most NIL allotment. They are there to essentially guide. They are there to help with ticket sales and help with concessions and help with making money in the certain places that a lot of athletic departments don't really think about making money in. Let's be totally honest. There are the private equity companies, their job, their sole mission is to get return on investment. That's what they do. That's the way they operate. They operate in dollars and cents if you are in the green or you're in the red. Pretty much simple. That's pretty much it. I question how long they are going to allow it to just work like college sports. Because the way this could work, the way this could go down in an ideal world is they are in that room, they give a couple of cents here and there, they help them make a little bit more money in concessions and all of that type of stuff, but they don't overstep. They don't say, that women's volleyball program isn't quite bringing in the money that we'd like it to bring. That swimming program is in the red a little bit more than it was last year. I think we should probably pull that back and just cut off that sport to make a little bit more money. That's what can't happen. Because here's the reality. They could come in and do absolutely nothing but push money into Utah. They're going to make money out of it. I promise you that. They will make money out of this football program. They will make money out of some other smaller programs that still do pretty good business around Utah. Regardless, they will make money. Will it be enough money is the ultimate question here, because you're always going to want to make more money. You're always going to want to have a better ROI. You're always going to want to be a little bit further up on the totem pole when it comes to what you're bringing in every year. If they come in and they're willing to provide the capital and they're willing to say, we're going to let college sports be college sports, we just want to be able to help you, guide you through it, and yeah, we'll take a little bit off the top at the end of the year. I think that can work okay. I find it really, really hard to believe that that's going to be the long-term case. Maybe it will be for a couple of years and Utah does incredible things on the football field and everyone's happy. I think there comes a time when maybe they overstep just a little bit and a smaller sport is cut off. Or a smaller sport, at the very least, is not given the resources that they need to compete, and football is given everything they could possibly need. This was unavoidable. That's the reality of this situation, which is very frustrating, but that's where we are. As of right now, the other solution would be nearly doubling tuition at some of these places. I know that sounds crazy, but again, the money mismanagement in this sport and in college sports in general has been truly incredible for a very long time. They're realizing right now that they just need more money to compete, to be able to keep everything going forward. So here's the reality. Every football program is looking for money every which way they can get it. Every football program probably doesn't want to do what Utah just did. A lot of them are going to have to, plain and simple. A lot of them are going to have to lean into this and just hope that these people don't overstep. Hope that these people allow college sports to be what it is. I question that that's going to be the case. So a lot of people were bemoaning this as the end of college football or the end of college sports in general. I hope that's not the case. I hope that that is not something that happens, and it won't be for college football. It'll be different. I can absolutely promise you that, and I worry. It is the start of a very slippery slope that can create a whole lot of problems for a whole lot of people playing college sports that aren't football right now, which is a whole lot of people out there. But we'll see what happens over there at Utah. Obviously, we'll know much more as this kind of unfolds and we see the decisions that are being made. Are they invasive? Are they not? Are they overstepping? Are they not? It'll be debated at large, and we will talk about it much more, but I can almost promise you, this is not the last time that you will see this. This is not the last time that we will be talking about something like this in college sports. And then the transfer portal blew up today. And you'll find that it comes right in conjunction with a lot of these guys got their last paycheck on their NIL deals. A lot of these guys had those conversations of what happens next year, what can I get paid, am I a guaranteed starter, all that good stuff that happens around this time of year, and it's blown up today. DJ Lagway is in the portal. He is going to get out of Gainesville. It sounds like Miami, Texas Tech, Baylor, LSU all in on this one. Baylor, his father did go there, so I would not count out Baylor by any means there. I'd probably have Miami at the top, but I do think there's a number of other guys there, like Dylan Raiola entered the portal today. Brendan Sorsby, I think that might be the Indiana quarterback next year, but he enters from Cincinnati. A number of other guys. One interesting name to watch over there from Texas, Leona Lafau, a starting linebacker going into next year, starting linebacker this year right next to Anthony Hill. Very talented player that's walking out of Texas. That's a definite starter for 2026 that will not be on the Longhorns anymore. That's something to watch. I don't know what the situation is there. I don't know if there's a very good offer that came in. I tend to believe that's what's going on, but at the end of the day, he is out the door over there at Austin. Definitely a name to watch there. One name that is not going to enter the portal, it seems, is Lenora Sellers. It sounds like he is going to return to South Carolina for 2026. I don't necessarily love the decision. I love that he's sticking around at South Carolina. I'll be totally honest, I probably would have rolled the dice with the draft. I think the combine numbers would have been absolutely incredible. I think his physical ability would have gotten him drafted higher than he will in 2027. I could be wrong about that. He could have a great year at South Carolina and do some great things. I tend to believe his best shot was taking the opening that he had and going to the 2026 draft and saying, I'm just going to wow them at the combine, and hopefully people will take a chance on me and say, if we can refine that guy, he's going to do incredible things. But there's going to be a lot of names out there. Sam Levitt is out there as well, DJ Lagway. It's going to be a lot of big-time names. Dylan Raiola is entering the portal as was kind of expected for the last couple of weeks. Regardless, this thing is going to get off the rails really quickly. It's going to get very, very crazy really quickly. Maybe we'll talk about it more on Friday just to give you an idea of where we stand. Overall, we're going to talk about it just about every week moving forward. And then we got to get into the actual window where all this stuff can happen and guys can commit and all that good stuff. It's going to get wild. I can absolutely promise you that, and we'll do our best to keep on top of everything because this quarterback cycle is going to be active as can be, and I think DJ Lagway is going to be at the very center of it. But going to be incredible to watch all of this unfold. Obviously, a big-time weekend coming up. We got playoffs starting on Friday with Oklahoma, Alabama, 3 more games on Saturday. We got a lot of coaching news. Michigan getting close to a hire. We'll see how that unfolds. I think still a little bit of work to do there, but I have to imagine they'd love to do that before the turn of the new year. A lot going on in the world of college football. We'll get into all of it as it unfolds tomorrow. We will be back, and we'll talk about all the games. We'll talk about my picks for all the playoff games coming up this weekend. We'll give some love to the FCS playoffs, what happened this past weekend, what we got coming up this weekend. We'll give some love to the bowl games going on this week because can't not give love to bowl schedules. So many things happening in the world of college football. We will talk about it all tomorrow. We'll talk about it all likely on Thursday as well. But again, thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment. It means the absolute world to me. Let me know what you think about any of this stuff that we just talked about. And thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you guys tomorrow.